The Mitsubishi A6M was a single-engine fighter aircraft used by the Imperial Japanese Navy during World War II. The Zero, as it is frequently called, was an exceptional aeronautical achievement for the time. Lightweight, agile, fast, and with unparalleled range, the A6M has become an iconic aircraft. In the 1930s, the Japanese aircraft industry adopted a new approach to weapon procurement. Self-reliance became important as Japan built up its military forces. After some years of learning, in the late 1930s, a new naval fighter aircraft for use on the growing Japanese carrier fleet was needed. Based on the experiences with the A5M, a new prototype aircraft was developed. Prototype 12 provided many refinements for the time, such as a strong but lightweight structure and a reimagined control system. After some early combat trials in China, it was adopted as a Type 0 carrier-based fighter in 1940. At this time, it was perhaps one of the most competitive machines out there. Used with great success during the early Japanese campaigns in the Pacific, the Zero design had certain limitations. Like every plane, the Type 0 was a summary of compromises. In this case, the design focused on aspects like range and maneuverability over others. Although Zeros would later also be given some sort of fuel tank protection and armor plating, the early variants lacked these measures, leaving them vulnerable under enemy fire. Introduced in 1940, it remained in service until the end of the war, with around 10,000 built. As with all aircraft, the Zero went through various models, but unlike some other aircraft, it does not necessarily have many distinguishing features that allow you to identify separate types from the outside. Before I show you those, let's quickly go over the design as a whole. Up front, a 3-bladed constant speed propeller provides thrust courtesy of a 14-cylinder air-cooled radial Sake engine. Cooling is provided by an underslung oil cooler and cowl flaps. The low wing has a distinct dihedral appearance and is rounded off at the ends. A large grated canopy provides good visibility all round, and a forward slanted antenna is fixed in its rear section. I want to draw your attention to the fuselage, which appears somewhat oval up front, but then tapers off really nicely into the tail assembly. There you will also see a rudder set above a pointy end, which hooks into the upper section of the vertical stabilizer. Of course, as a carrier aircraft, a tailhook is necessary and rounds off the look. An optional drop tank can also be carried for a longer range. Before I get started with the recognition guide, a few words on the Japanese designation system. In some books, in films, in documentaries, on the internet, sometimes you see people use the designation A6M Type 0 fighter. This is somewhat incorrect, as this mixes two different designation systems into one. A6M is the code name of the aircraft, whereas Type 0 carrier-based fighter, or shortened Type 0 fighter, is the formal name, or rather the service name really. It's not a big mistake combining the two, the world will still keep on spinning, but if you want to be full on accurate, you keep them apart. Now this brings me to the sub-variants of the aircraft. These are abbreviated as MOD, followed by a number. MOD is a shorthand for model, and the number that follows it is a composite code. The first number indicates the number of changes to the airframe, and the second the changes to the power plant. For example, 21 would stand for one major change in the airframe, yet no change to the engine. Yet in the case of 22, the model received one major change to the airframe and one change to the engine. It goes without saying that the changes that are counted here are the major ones and not little hatches or rivets. So let's together take a different look at the different A6M models and how you can differentiate them. As always, I will go over the most obvious external features which you can also see in pictures or in archive footage. Pointing out individual rivets or hatches really serves no one in that case. Plus, there are also some inconsistencies when it comes to these smaller differences, so I'll stick to the major ones. The respective variant's code name and service name will also be added in each case. So let's get started with the recognition of the Japanese Zero fighter. And before we jump into that, I thought we'd open here with a really cool little instructional video made by the United States during World War II to give you an introduction.
Here's something I didn't know about, sir.
Huh? Oh yes, the wingtips can be folded so as to utilize more space in a carrier. Incidentally, the span is 39 feet 4 inches. All right, go on with the engine.
Engine, radial, Mitsubishi version of our Cyclone.
That's right. There are twin-row 14 cylinders.
Fuselage. Blunt nose with a spinner on it. Cockpit canopy sits on the fuselage. Retractable landing gear with fairing plates. Say, there seems to be one gear missing, sir.
The gears are operated hydraulically. As a result, the wheels retract alternately.
I guess there are a couple of things I don't know about this airplane, sir.
I'm glad to hear you admit it. That's the beginning of wisdom. There's a pair of machine guns mounted in grooves above the cowling. They're 7.7 millimeter, and they're synchronized to fire through the propeller. I hope you don't ever get them on your tail.
I'm with you there, sir.
All right, finish her up.
Tail. Leading edge of flat surface tapers more than trailing edge, with the fuselage extending to a point beyond it. Leading edge of vertical piece tapers more than trailing edge. Tail is pointed, curves out away from the nose.
The Model 11 is up first. This is the first model to go into full production. One way of differentiating it from future types is the smaller engine section with the exposed channels for the 7.7mm machine guns mounted above the nose. While we are talking about the weapons, the aircraft also features a 20mm cannon in each wing. This armament will remain consistent for the time being. The air intake for the carburetor is also below the engine, and a grouped exhaust pipe runs at about the height of the wing root. Also notice the rounded wingtips, which will become important as I progress through the next models. And here you will see the first change. This is the Model 21. And I have to be honest here, there are very little changes, and the chances to differentiate a Mod 21 from a Mod 11 on some of those old blurry photos, well, it's next to zero. A major change but not visible, for example, is an enlarged wing tank. The other, and this is visible sometimes, is the folding wingtip, which allowed the plane to be used on the carrier elevators. This change is relatively useless to you because on most pictures those wingtips will be folded down into flying position. But this is why I want to draw your attention back to the rules for the change in model number. The 2 in 21 identifies this airframe change to the wing tips. You might also notice that the grouped exhaust pipes are now moved below the cowling gills. But, as I said earlier, small changes to the models are not affecting the designation number. It's only the major ones. A little bit of a special one in my list here, the A6M2N. This is the float plane version. If the difference between the aircraft isn't obvious by the 3 pontoons hanging off the plane, look at the missing pointy end at the tail. Be careful on this one, however. Its service name is not Type 0, but Type 2 sea-based fighter. The first big jump in the Type 0's performance came with the A6M3, or Model 32. This introduced a stronger Sake 21 engine with a 2-speed supercharger. A clear visual difference is the air intake, which was changed from below the engine to a top position. Because it was slightly larger, the engine section is now also closer to the cockpit and the wing root. You will see the spacing that was previously there to be gone. The previously exposed channels for the machine guns are also now closed off. Now also look at the wings, they are clipped. And because of the airframe change to the wings and the new engine, the model designation changes to 32. However, there is another A6M3, and this is the Model 22, which actually came after the 32. Again, this might seem counterintuitive, but remember the rules for the model numbers. The Model 22 reintroduces the foldable wingtips from the Model 21, so that reduces the airframe change by 1. But at the same time, it also has that new Sake engine, so instead of being a 21, it is a Model 22. It also has new fuel tanks in the outer wings, and this reverses the range loss with the Model 32. On some very good old pictures, you can also identify these aircrafts because of that new fuel tank, as there is a new fuel cap appearing on the outer section of the wing. Some Model 22 aircraft also feature a longer barrel, as the 20mm cannon changed to a newer model. These aircraft were then known as the A6M3A or the Model 22 Ko. I know this was a little bit complex, but you worked through it, well done. Then again, if you think it was complicated until now, wait until I introduce you to the next model, the A6M5 or the Model 52. Differentiating it from the previous models is initially relatively straightforward, but there is a twist. It comes in 4 different variants, and differentiating between those is not that easy. In the literature, you'll find them either designated as a plain Model 52 or with an additional shorthand A, B, C, or the Japanese Ko, Otsu, Hei. Let's look at the overall changes that I introduced initially. The engine remains the same, there is no designation change there as you have seen, but it now has visible individual exhaust stacks instead of a grouped one. Then we have the carburetor air intake, which is now more rounded. And the wings are shortened by just about half a meter, that's just under 2 feet, and have more rounded tips. You can identify this wing because the wingtips run smoothly into the shorter ailerons and because the flaps are 1 frame larger, that's about the length of your hand. The armament also changed. The 20mm cannons used are the new model with the longer barrels. You'll remember that these were introduced with the Model 22. Cool. Okay, so now I will show you the following variants of the Model 52. The first variation of this plane has pretty much no external difference. However, changes in the ammo supply from drum to belt resulted in a loss of a bulge on the underside of the wing. Good luck finding that in pictures, however. Speaking of the wing, its thickness was also increased by 0.2mm, but again, you won't notice that in a picture. Then the Model 52 Otsu comes with minor changes. The nose-mounted starboard machine gun changed to a higher caliber, thus the gun openings have an asymmetric look. The windscreen is also usually thicker due to armored glass. Sometimes 8mm armor was also added behind the pilot. And this is where I draw your attention to the last Model 52 on the list, the Hei. The 7.7mm gun was deleted, but the gun opening remains, so that's no help here. Nevertheless, 2 additional wing machine guns outboard of the cannons were added, as well as rocket racks under the wings. Armored glass was also added behind the pilot's head, and if not fitted previously, armor was fitted behind his seat as well. The fuel tank in the fuselage was changed to be self-sealing. In a few cases, a variant of the Sake 31 engine was also added, but without the water methanol injection. However, the model designation does not take this into account. So that rounds off the main Type 0 production types. While the Model 62 and 63 and 64 were put into production, they are incredibly rare. The Model 62 and 63 were mainly designated for special attack. You'll notice that on one of them the designation changes to take into account the new Sake 31, but there is no clear number on how many were built, not that many however. And only 2 Model 64s were completed, and this aircraft can be identified by the larger engine and the air intake. So this completes my overview of the A6M or Type 0 fighter. I want to give special thanks to Justin Pyke and QAZ for their help and suggestions when fact-checking the script. If you enjoyed it, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon or channel memberships. Remember, it's you, the viewer, that makes this content possible, not just these recognition guides, but also inside the cockpit and the more detailed operations videos. And you will also receive perk rewards like wallpapers, early access to upcoming videos, and access to my Discord server, where you will find many other aviation enthusiasts. However, if you cannot support my channel, don't worry, I understand. Please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you're not reliant on YouTube telling you which videos to watch, and sharing this video with your friends. As always, have a great day and see you in the sky.